Hi everyone, welcome to Cloud Ranger's Microsoft Azure training. As you know, I'm Sean Ismail, a Microsoft Azure MVP, and that's my contact information below there. Today we are going to talk about business continuity. This is part 4 of Azure SQL Database series that we have been doing for the last month or so. So let's get started. Before we talk about business continuity and the details of you know what the Azure SQL's capabilities are for having your business continuity, we need to understand what business continuity actually means. Technically, business continuity is all about the planning and the preparation that will sort of ensure that when an organization is going through or uh, has had some sort of an event when there's an interruption of the business due to the continuation of the business, that you have a plan and you have a preparation to do something about it. And when there's a disruption, it could be a catastrophic disaster. It could be, you know, it could be a technological failure. It could be something very simple where, you are doing a deployment and something went wrong, right? So there are different kinds of disruptions that can happen in the continuum of your business. And that's what business continuity means, that you are going to have a plan and you're going to have the procedures, preparation to actually tackle any sort of emergencies like that. And you can't predict up to a certain level what is the worst case scenario that can happen to your business. So this is not a very complicated procedure to understand, but the complicated procedure actually from my personal experience is actually having organizations sit down and think about it, that hey, there are things that can happen to your technology stack or other stacks due to some sort of a disruption, and what exactly are you going to do about it? In fact, most of the organizations these days depend on technology quite a bit for functioning. So that's the challenge. So you need to understand that, and in our context of Azure SQL, mostly what we are talking about is that data backup, and we're talking about data retention, high availability. Every workload can have its own plan and process for business continuity, and those are the ones that are for Azure SQL. There are other workloads, obviously, that you may have. They may require different planning, different preparation, different processes, but for Azure SQL, that's what we have here. Combined with other workloads, having Azure SQL's business continuity strategy will contribute to your overall business continuity in your organization. So we need to understand that. So moving on, before we get into more details of Azure SQL's capabilities, I want to talk about three different things here that you should understand. Anytime there's a conversation of business continuity for um, any workload, there are things you need to know. So the first thing you need to know is the recovery time objective, is the RTO. This is the maximum acceptable time before the workload fully recovers after a disruptive event. So if anybody comes and asks you to establish a business continuity plan, you should basically ask them, what's the first thing you should ask them, that what's your RTO? Means, what is the amount of time are you going to give me before my workload can fully recover? So let's say that there was a power outage. How long can you actually let me wait, before which my workload needs to come online? Obviously, some of the answers are, well, immediately. Well, that's true. You want your services to be up immediately, but some of these things come with a lot of costs, lot of effort. So maybe your business does not really run after hours. Like let's say after midnight, you really don't care if uh, a certain workload of yours was running. Let's say it was a web page that only people access, like an intranet people only access during business hours. You really don't care if it actually went down for a couple of hours after midnight. So your RTO will be a little bit longer. They'll be like, all right, you could, if there's a failure, you could probably bring that up after 2 hours or 3 hours. So that would be your time for that. And then you have the recovery point objective, the RPO, which is the maximum amount of data updates the workload can tolerate losing. So this is the interesting, complicated one. The reason I say interesting is because it's always interesting to find out how different organizations calculate this, right? So let's say you have a web page where your customers order. It's an e-commerce site. Customers orders for products. Now, maybe you might have a baseline saying that I have 5 customers, having a full order done in every hour. So technically, you lose those 5 orders if your services are down for an hour. So in our previous example, for 2 hours, you may lose 10 customers order. That might not be acceptable to your business, depending on the size you are. Now, if you're somebody like Amazon, they probably don't care about 10 orders. They can wait. They know the customers will come back or whatever. So for them, things might be a little different. I'm not saying that their RPO is quite large, but that's what it is. But it may also happen, they may come and say that, hey, we can't miss anything. Like we have to ensure that customers can order no matter what. So at that point, what you're changing basically is saying that, okay, I have a very aggressive RPO. I cannot lose anything. So the technology that I need to put behind for my business continuity has got to be very robust. Means there has to be crazy failovers, crazy high availability, crazy, geo availability, which is getting very popular right now. So you need to start thinking of all those things. So overall, the more aggressive your RTO and RPO is, basically the more technology and more money you need to put in the solution to make this thing happen. Now, I'm also a firm believer of great architectures when it comes to technological solutions. So there are most of the software suites out there, most of the technology out there has a robust, architectural solution that you can create where high availability is thought about from day one, and you can have DR scenarios thought of from day one. So things are getting actually a lot easier these days to do this. So you may maintain an aggressive RTO and RPO. And the last thing, that's data retention, is very much in context of data archiving in general, since we're talking about backups, is the maximum amount of time the data needs to be archived. So, all right, you're backing up your data. Yeah, you're taking care of your RTO, RPO, business continuity and everything. But how long do you keep this data backed up, right? Do you keep it backed up for like, a week, a month, year, 5 years, 7 years, or forever? A lot of this thing might have a lot to do with compliancy based on your state or province or where you are, depending on even which country you are, that you can only hold information for that long. Sometimes this is very much related with, your financial cycles. Like you have to keep it for 7 years, and by law and things like that. So you have to establish that as well, because don't forget, data retention over time, the longer you keep it, more storage is required, and that's again things that you have to consider for. If you were on premises, you would have to consider for this quite a bit. In the cloud, given that you can have your storage for a while, I mean, you can rapid provision storage as well. It might be a lot easier and cheaper these days. But back in the days, this was a huge thing, and you had to definitely put in a lot of money and technology in there to have a high data retention. So let's talk about a little bit about Azure SQL Database. So Azure SQL Database cannot directly use the database and transaction log backup like the Microsoft SQL Server. So if you're used to Microsoft SQL Server, you are thinking of, oh, no big deal, I'll do a database backup, I'll do a transaction log backup. You cannot do that. And there are very good reasons you cannot do that, because Microsoft actually made it very easy in Azure SQL Database to actually do this kind of. So in fact, doing a database and transaction log backup sounds very complicated in the cloud arena. So that's one thing. And SQL Database, obviously, Azure SQL Database obviously have several business continuity features. Like as you will see, there is automatic backups, which I totally love. Out of the box, there will be a lot of things that can happen, and optional database replication. And I'll let you know why it's called optional. So the way now this session will progress, is I'll go through the very basic rudimentary database backup, the hard way of doing it, and keep going upwards and make it easier and easier. Some of them I mean, when you go to the next level, it obviously gets complex, but it just goes easier and easier. All right, so let's get started with the first process that we look at for doing backups and restores. So first thing we are going to do is the database copy and export. This is probably the most manual. There's obviously I mean, there are reasons why you do that, but this is a very manual process if it comes to your backups and restoring. And chances are you probably will not do this on a daily basis for your backups. But definitely I'll show you because it's one of the easiest as well. So the backup procedure is very manual, like I mentioned. It's copying and exporting the database to a backpack file, and I have spelled that backpack wrong. I actually spelled with a K. There's no K in there. So what will happen is that we have in a previous session seen how you can use the Management Studio to export your database in a backpack because we are doing a migration or we are doing an on-premise restore. So this is very similar. You basically export the database in a backpack file and you are just storing it in a storage account. So the restore procedure obviously is in case of a failure, you just create a new database server which is very easy to do in Azure, and just pretty much import the exported copy from the database of the database from the storage account. So technically, you are just taking the backpack file, going to the new server you created, and say that, hey, import this file. So this is very simple backup solution. I mean, you can see I mean, you can do this in a couple of clicks in the portal. As we go in the demo, I'm going to show you. The good thing about this, backup is that you can actually take that database and take it to your on-premise server, SQL server, and actually import that. So technically, you can take your backups from your cloud and put it in your on-premises environment for whatever reason, right? I mean, it could be like you are doing some sort of a testing or some sort of compatibility testing, or maybe you are actually migrating from a cloud to your on-premise environment. There are test cases, there are cases where your business may want that, hey, we don't want to take this database any longer in the cloud. How do I put it or migrate this database to Azure SQL Server? So this is the way. And I know a lot of people have asked me before that, hey, how do you take my cloud database and move it? Well, this is how you move it. And the database copy and export is very analogous to the full backup in Microsoft SQL Server. If you remember your SQL Server full database backup, you'll see that this is quite similar, right? I mentioned this is not the preferred method of backing up because you can imagine doing this every day or doing this every hour, depending on your business continuity plan. Once again, this might be a lot of work, a lot of manual intervention, operational overheads because you have to have somebody go and do that. There might be errors in doing that. There might be inconsistencies. You can do that. So the next one is not transactionally consistent backups. Means while you are doing the backup, it's not taking care of the other transactions that are going on at the same time. If you're used to doing full backups, you know this very well, that when you're doing that, other transactions that are happening are not going to be considered. So the next time you are actually trying to restore that, between the time you completed the backup to the next backup, you'll actually have some data that have been lost because you just didn't back them up. And obviously, there's additional costs of storage because you're taking these backpack files and you're um, putting them in storage accounts. Like these backup files will be all stored there, and it's probably not that most expensive in Azure, the storage, because it's quite cheap. But having said that, though, there is still costs associated with that. So what I'm going to do right now is go to the portal and show you how to do this. I just want to let you know that this is also quite time consuming. So when you are trying to do this backup, it actually takes up to 10-15 minutes. I mean, even if I just used the database, which is the sample database that comes from Azure, it's not even a large database, but I noticed it took about 10-15 minutes. So give yourself some time to actually figure out, to actually go through this demo. And and I'm obviously going to pause the video and make it super fast for you guys, but give yourself some time to do this. All right, so let's go to the portal. Alrighty, so we are here at my portal, and I haven't done much over here. I just created a regular SQL server in East US2 location, and when I was provisioning a database, I went and put the sample database over here, the adventure works. So that's all I have done so far. You should know this by now, how to do all of this. If you don't, watch my previous sessions and I'll show you how to create a database and database server and do all of that work. Okay, so we're not getting into all that. So the first thing I want to do is go to my database. I want to show you what's my database size. This should not be more than 12-13 megs from what I understand. So go to database size. here. Yeah, it's about 12 megs. So it's not really a large database. Your database could be like 50 gigs, 30 gigs, quite a bit, right? So let's go and do the database backup and the manual backup, right? So that's what we're going to do. So let's go over here, SQL backup. I want to see one more thing here. Okay, so you'll see over here, there's an export option here. Go on your database console over here. So go create export. It is going to conveniently give you the date and time of your database. So it's actually giving you a file name for this database. It's asking which subscription it needs to be, and it's asking you to put this in a storage account. Like I mentioned, the backpack file will be put in a storage account. So I don't have a storage account because, well, actually I do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to store the Ranger SQL DB backups storage account that I have created. It's a regular storage account. I have not put much of a thought over here. It's standard locally redundant storage. You could make it geo redundant or whatever, right? So I'm going to do that. In there, I have a container called backups, and in the backups container, I'm going to go ahead and put all my backups in there. Okay, and it's obviously asking me what is the server logging information. So I'm going to put that over here now, and that's it. We create OK, and it should go ahead and create the backup file and store it as a backpack file in the storage account that we have mentioned here. So let's go ahead and click on OK. And my database export is in progress, and I'm going to show you what that actually means. So let's go to my database server real quick, check something out. In my database server, I should have operations, and under there, I should have import export history. So let's go over there. And obviously, you can see I have done quite a bit, but I want to show you the one that's going on over here. Export Ranger SQL Database running and progress. So if you click on the latest one over here, you can see this task is now running and the progress is 0%. Now, I mentioned this actually takes about 10 to 15 minutes. So I'm going to pause the video at this point and let this happen, and I'll come back once this is done. I've tried this actually before yesterday. Yeah, let me show you the other export job. It took about, yeah, close to, so this was 4:15 p.m. It was down about 4:29. So closely about half an hour, 15 minutes of time it took to do that. And this was exactly the same database I was doing a practice run before the demo. So I guess we'll leave it at this point, and once it's done, I'll come back. And if you are already following me, this is probably the time to do something else. All right, be right back. All right, so looks like it has completed. So let's go refresh this real quick. Took about 15 minutes, I think. So you can see the export job over here now says completed, and we started at 12:22. It's 12:37. About 15 minutes. It's almost 15 minutes. In fact, it's really 15 minutes for the database, 12 megs of database to be completed. So as you can imagine, if you're doing this for 10 gigs of data, it took 15 minutes for like, 25 or 12 megs. Imagine doing this for gigs and gigs of data. It will take quite a bit of time. In fact, if this keeps running for almost 12 hours, I mean, it kind of gives you an option to cancel the job and say that, hey, it's taking too long or something has went wrong. So if you're trying to do this for your database every day, you can see how this can become an operational overhead, and this definitely should not be your first backup strategy for protecting your databases. So now that we have done this here, let's go and see how we can restore it. Before we restore it, let's go to the storage account. So Ranger SQL DB backups was my storage account. So it's a blob. Let's go ahead and see backups was the container. In the container, we should see a file. Let's refresh this. So 1890. So as you can see, this is the backpack file over here. Okay, so .backpack. So this is the file. It was about 374 KB. This was the file that was taken for the backup of. This was the backup of the entire database over there. So what we are going to do is we are going to restore it. The way you restore it is quite simple as well. Go to your server, So rather than the database in the server, you go over here and you can see import database. So click on import database. Right now we only have one database on the server, the original one, Ranger SQL DB, which is the primary one. So you have to go choose the subscription, the storage. So in the storage, we know the backpack file is over here. So let's go ahead and select that. So it gives you an option of selecting that file. You can see it actually created that, picked up that name from the database name from there as well. So what's happening over here is that you need that unique name there. The reason you need that unique name there is because if your backpack file has just Ranger SQL DB and you try to attach this database to this database server, it will obviously throw you that warning and be like, hey, you can't do that. There's already a server in that name. So the first thing you need to do while restoring is keep that original name. Okay, now it's looking for the password, so let's go ahead and give the password. This does not take too long, uh, maybe a couple of minutes at its best. So we'll let the thing import over here, and I'll come back when this database shows up over here. Let's actually go here. You should start seeing it in a bit. I'm going to the databases, and you should see another one, Ranger SQL DB, with whatever name you have there. Okay, so I'm going to pause and be right back. All right, it didn't take too long for this to show up, maybe less than a minute. So right now you can see there's another database, Ranger SQL DB, with this name. I want to show you something interesting. This one I did deliberately earlier. If you look at everything else over here, it looks the same except the pricing tier. So before it was a standard S0, right now I have a standard S2. So you can restore this database to a different tier. Okay, just say you needed more performance with the new one. So obviously S2 has a higher performance than S0, and we were able to do that. So let's connect to our server and see what we have here. So we go to our management studio and put in the password there. Let's wear default. Okay, connect. So when we connect over here, go to databases. In databases, you should see the backed up database restored here as well. So technically, it should have all the information that your backup, your current table has. So for whatever reason, if you need to query this backup data separately right now, you can do so. Your applications are still connecting. Let's say you have an application, they all are still connecting to this one over here, right? So there are ways to do this. So now that you have restored it and you see that, hey, my databases look fine. I mean, whatever I was looking for has been restored on this database, and I want this one to be the primary. The way to do that is basically you are deleting this database and you're changing the name of this database to Ranger SQL DB. Be very careful when you're doing that. You don't want to mess anything up. So be absolutely sure that when you restore this, you do have everything over here. Now, if you have transaction going on while we did this, obviously when you restore this one, you are those uh, losing those data at that point. So this is where the recovery point objective RPO comes in, that hey, you are restoring to a different time right now, but there might have been some transactions that already happened to Ranger SQL DB. What do you do about it? Your business may say that, hey, this there's probably one or two things that got written, but we are losing a lot if we don't restore this. So we don't care about the new transactions. Just go revert to this one. Sure, that would work out. But if your organization comes and says, no, we have about 100 transactions that already happened or thousands in the last couple of minutes, obviously this is not going to be a solution for you. And you may have to do something else to look up your data and do that. But what I would do is basically delete this database right now, rename this one to Ranger SQL DB, and you should be good to go. For certain businesses, this is perfectly fine. Let's say you're just you're just a website, it's all read-only data, you have nothing to lose, bam, you're good to go. So I want to talk about one thing here. You noticed that this actually took a little bit of a time. This is a manual overhead. This should not be your typical. This should not be your typical solution for your backup strategy or business continuity. I see good reason where you might need a full backup, like we do in on-premises environment where we took a full backup before a maintenance perhaps or whatever. Sure, you can do all of that over here. At the same time, there are other ways for maintenances and anything else that you need to do on the cloud. There are other ways where you can keep your data still up and running and not even do this. So it's once again a newer way of thinking that, am I going to do something that I'm used to, taking a full backup, or I'm going to use other technologies in there. Okay, so that's what it is over here. Let's go in here and show you if there's anything else I need to show you. Probably not, right? seems like everything else is the same. All right, so let's go back to our slides, and I'm going to show you the next level or the next strategy that you have to back up and restore data. Okay, so let's go to the slides here. All right, so we're going to talk about something now called automated backups, and I'll tell you, or sometimes it's called point and restore, point in time restore backups, but I'll let you know why it's called automated backups. So Azure SQL Database provides automated backup database backups. It's a functionality built into Azure SQL. Means, like you don't have to do anything for these backups to even kick in. Okay, so you don't have to opt in, like you don't have to go check a box and be like, all right, I want automated backups or whatever. There's no additional cost, which is very interesting. So you do not get charged for backing up your databases. Backups are stored in a geo-redundant storage. So you'll find a lot of information regarding this geo-redundant storage thing. Just go with it. It is going to get stored in a geo-redundant storage. Okay, so backups are automatically paired in, automatically placed in paired regions. I'll tell you a little bit of what a paired region is and what are the different paired regions that are out there. And it can be restored to the same database server or a new database server. So once again, once you are backing up in the same database server, ideally you may want to do this in the same database server, or you may want to do this in a completely different database server for whatever reason, because you are probably testing something or doing anything. Before I go to the next level over here, or the next points over here, in our previous full backup scenario where we did the export options, you may have noticed that we created a new database. So there's no in-place database restoring. You cannot point to the old old database and be like, hey, go ahead and update the database with previous information or the previous backup data. Similarly over here, you cannot restore the database back in place. Like you cannot restore it to the same database. You have to, you have to create a new database while you are storing this. Does not matter where the database is coming from, and have to do the whole renaming thing if you must or if you have to. Okay, so moving on, backup routine. So how is this in-place backup or the automated backups happening? Well, there's a full database backups weekly. Okay, there's a differential backups that happens hourly, and there's a transactional, or how we know as incremental backups, happening every 5 minutes. So this backup routine is provided to you. You don't have to create this, and that's why it's also one of the features of automated part of the backups, right? You don't have to do anything over here to schedule this. It's done for you. The above routine allows for point-in-time restore. So that means that every 5 minutes, you are pretty much having an incremental backup. Every hour, you had a differential. And weekly, you will have a full database backup. So it gives you a point in time. Like you can choose any point in time and be like, hey, I want to restore this backup to this point. This point in time, right? And that's what it does for you. Restore to on-premises environment not available. So unlike our previous export to backup solution, you cannot restore through this method to your on-premises environment. So that's one thing you definitely have to remember. The restore points are there within 7 days. So we're talking about some sort of retention here. So basic service tier, the restore points is happening within 7 days, and the standard and premier tiers, all the restore points within 35 days. So it gives you enough time. You have 35 days in point where you can take this data and you can, it will give you all this restore points. And after that, what it does, it's basically archived. So your backups are still there, but given your retention, but that's all you can do. If you need more time or for whatever reason than that, you definitely have to, call up Azure support and ask them to provide you more time or whatever you need depending on your business need. But right now, this is what they have: 7 days, 35 days, given the type of tier you have. This automated backups is actually provided for all tiers, basic, standard, and premium, just to let you know, all right? So it's already there. So if you have a retention period from a basic tier, which is all within 7 days, all the restored points, you can obviously change your tier, and that's what I mean over here. Retention periods are changed by changing tiers. You can go from 7 days to 35 days by just changing that, okay? So this is the most automated backup. What happens is as soon as you created your database, or I had created my database, you don't have to opt in, right? So I think within a couple of minutes, your first backup is taken, first full backup is taken for your databases, and it calculates that, okay, let's say I did that at 8 a.m. So when will my first backup was, let's say at 8:05, means my next differential backup will be at 9:05, and transaction backup every 5 minutes. So it calculates everything after the full first backup, right? And it's already done there for you. So before I go to the demo, I want to show you what paired regions mean. I might have touched on this back in the days when I was doing a uh, storage accounts session, that geo-redundant storage will always have your data in a paired region. Means, let's say you are in Canada Central, it will be paired with another location, which will be, let's say, Canada East. If you're in East US 2, which I'm using right now, it will have a paired regions. Means you have no control over this, but what it will do is it will take your backup and make it geo-redundant by placing some of your data in that location, but not some of your data. Let me be careful when I say that. All of your data in that location. So a geo-redundant storage actually costs a little bit more, but over here, you don't have to worry about it because there's no additional cost of doing this. But for whatever reason, if you have a geo-redundant storage, remember that your data is in a paired region. For some of us, it's okay, and for some of us, it's not. So for example, let's say I'm in Ontario. So we have a new Azure data center in Toronto right now. So if there are certain businesses in Ontario, government and provincial businesses who don't want their data even placed anywhere else in the country, right? Let alone out of Canada. So if I'm in Ontario and working with one of these businesses and I do a backup for them, the secondary paired region is actually currently in Montreal, in Quebec. So that does not work out for that business because the business will be like, hang on a second, when you are doing this backup, this geo-redundant, whatever you are doing, it's taking our data and putting in a paired region, which is not in Ontario, but in Quebec. So it's there, you are not going to be compliant. So be careful when you are doing this and you understand that in general about geo-redundant storage, because your country might have different rules and regulations regarding data residency, right? Certain countries probably won't care, certain countries probably will. Now, if this was a business in Canada, which did not care, as long as the data was in Canada, I could have definitely used the Toronto and Montreal data, locations. I should be fine. But let's imagine now you only have one location in your entire country, or you don't even have it. Doing this might not be the best idea for you. So be very careful when you do anything with the data and store everywhere else. So let me show you the paired regions here real quick. I do have in the next slide. So like I mentioned, Canada, let's say I was here, Canada Central. This will be the Toronto data center. This is the one in Montreal, the Quebec one. So Ontario, the paired center is in Quebec. So let's say I'm using East US 2 right now. Um, East US and East US 2, US is 2. My paired region is US Central. So when I do this demo, I mean, I don't have to even do any demo. My backups are already kicked in as soon as I created the database. Like I mentioned, it's auto. So now I do have data in US Central data centers as well, right? So it happens automatically, and you have to remember. So look at this and find out your paired regions. There are more and more new data centers coming up with Azure. So go and go use the search engine or go look at Azure documentations for paired regions, and it should be able to tell you where your data is going. Okay, so let's go ahead to the demo and let me show you everything over here that we have talked about. Alrighty, so let's go to our database over here. So Ranger SQL Database, and this is very simple, like really, really simple. I want you to go over here. You see in your database, you should have an option called restore. It's as simple as that. This is what we did last time, the export, but here we're coming to restore. As you can see, it's giving a database name and it's looking at the current time in UTC. So remember, this is not probably in your time zone. It's using the UTC, so you have to do some calculation over there. Restore point UTC. And this is the thing, it's giving you option over here. Like you can see, I created this database. Yesterday it was a Sunday, Monday over here. So these are the different restore points that you can have to restore the data. And you choose the time, you choose the date and time that you need to restore it to, and then you restore the data. This is very simple. With the target server over here, we currently have the current target server, not elastic, and the pricing tier. We are going to have the pricing tier as, let's say I'm going to keep it as zero over here, and you pretty much click OK over here, and you're good to restore. This will be similar. It is going to create in this server, it's going to create a new database with this name, and you have the restored data there. So I've gone and clicked OK on that. Uh, let's go and refresh this, and we're going to wait and see how this restores now. All right, so it took a good few minutes, but as you can see, it showed up here. That's the new name of the database we have. And just like the previous backup import, database import, we can see it's available for us here. Let's go to the management studio here. And we are going to refresh this. Yep, it showed up here as well. So as you can see, it showed up over here. Now you have the restored the backup restored here. You see what you need to do and take it from there. So it's very similar to how we did it earlier with our export. But the options, really the thing I wanted to show you over here was that when you are restoring it, you have so much options over here to restore to a different point in time. And I've mentioned going over that at what times these are all backed up. Now, one thing I want to talk about is that, I want to reiterate, is that this is done automatically for you. We had not gone in and configured anything, or at least I haven't offline configured anything on this database for this to kick in. Give your database some time, a couple of hours or anything, and you go hit and restore, you'll see that it started creating restore points, and it will take things from there. Okay, you don't have to opt in. You can't opt out, and definitely there are certain things, aspects of this that you cannot change, like the retention time, when a full backup is done, when a differential is done, those you cannot do. Okay, so those are already there for you. This is pretty much your choice of backup. It is done very well. 5 minutes every incremental, I think, is quite good for most organizations. Now, if you have like hundreds of transactions that are happening every minute, maybe this might not be the choice for you, right? Because remember, your incremental is done every 5 minutes. So you need to ensure that you keep that in mind. But for most people, this should work out. Okay. So having said that, I'm going to move on to something else right now in this session. It's not exactly a backup mechanism, but it's more of a DR solution, a disaster recovery solution and high availability solution. But it turns out to be also your premium solution for additional extra backup. So let's say that while we were doing this backup restore with automated backup, it took like, I don't know, 5-6 minutes for it to restore. Similar problem to your previous backup that, hey, okay, you're giving me restore points. You're giving me more points of recovery, but still it takes time for you to restore this. Um, and I can't do that. My business cannot even wait that 5 minutes for an incremental backup to happen because I do a large e-commerce site and I have hundreds of transactions that will end up happening per minute or even in few seconds, and there's no way that backup restore is not going to work for me. So then there is an option, and that's what we are going to talk about right now. What exactly you're going to do if you fall in those categories where you have very, very low tolerance for RTO and RPO. Okay, definitely it's a little bit costlier, but if that's what you need, that's what you have to do with your backups, right? So let's go to the presentation here real quick. So what we are going to talk about is active geo replication, or this used to be called geo replication. In fact, most of the documents in Azure already have been, updated with active geo replication. There used to be something called as geo replication, where you take the backup that you have and you are replicating it in a different location. Okay, so if you guys are coming from a SQL background, Microsoft SQL Server background, this is very analogous to the SQL always on feature, and it's quite similar actually. So we will take one or more redundant copies of this database, right? We'll say that, okay, I have this database over here. I'm going to take a copy of this database and I'm going to keep it in a different location and keep updating it. So anything that happens to my current database will also be replicated on the other end. So at any given time, I'll say, let's say I have 2 copies total, original and the secondary, primary and secondary. This can be used definitely for like a high availability HA solution or a disaster recovery DR solution, right? I mean, you now have 2 databases that you're maintaining. It's available for all tiers, like all the tiers will have it if you want to go and enable that. So the difference between a geo replication, which was there before, and an active geo replication is a couple. One is in regular geo replication, you could only have one unreadable secondary database. Okay, what does that mean? Unreadable secondary means that your primary database is in your primary location. In some location that you choose, you can have a secondary, but you would not have any control over the secondary. This was just there for you to fail over, or in case there's a disaster, for you to go and enable that. Okay, so you cannot use the secondary database for anything. This is something Microsoft is getting away from. They're not going to be doing that anymore. In 2017, that feature is completely going to be taken out. There's nothing going to be called geo-replication for Azure SQL. It's going to be active geo-replication. With active geo-replication, and that's what we are going over today, is you can have up to 4 readable secondary database. So what happens is that you can not only have 4 other secondary databases rather than one, you also have access to them to read them. Maybe not write them. I mean, definitely not to write them, but to read them. And there are definitely a lot of benefits that come because of this, right? So it's more resilient. Let's say that, okay, 4 copies are definitely better than 1 copy. We know that. And the other thing is it's readable. So let's say your primary application uses your primary database. Maybe you have a reporting that needs to be done on this database, and you don't want to run that reporting queries or reporting suite on your primary database because it is going to affect performance. So you can actually take your reporting software and point it to one of the secondary readable databases and take the data, read it from there, and do whatever you need to do. Right? So it's quite interesting, and people who do databases, I'm pretty sure you have this smile on your face right now because out of the box, this gives you a secondary copy to do your reporting, right? And the other thing is that it's on different locations. Like, I mean, since it's 4 different copies, you can put it in 4 different locations altogether or regions altogether. Now, this is definitely expensive. The reason behind that is that uh, because that it's readable means that any location you have a secondary, you'll have to have a SQL server there as well, like your primary, to serve that database, right? So definitely it's a little bit, well, it might be considerably expensive for you to go through this solution. But people who need this kind of resiliency, people who need to maintain this kind of RTO and RPO, absolutely need that, right? So let's say, and I'm going to go through one of these demos that you something happens to your databases, your primary database, you can go and have your application point up and to the second one of the secondaries, and you can fail over and make the secondary location primary in like few seconds. So it's very resilient, it's very robust, and it's awesome. And this is in all addition to your previous automated backups that we talked about, because that still happens regardless of where you do a replication or you don't do a replication, right? So your point in time restore always keeps happening as well. So going back to our slide over here, when geo replication is configured, a secondary database is created. Obviously, what we have to talk about in a specified server. Okay, and the secondary database cannot be in the same server. Okay, uh, it has to be a separate SQL server altogether. So you cannot have a replica happening to the same server your primary is in. So like we saw the very first export method where we did the import in the same server. We did the point in time restore and we did it on the same server. Unfortunately, with replication, it has to be on a different server, and definitely, like I mentioned, that it becomes a little bit more expensive as well. So as soon as you activate that, the original database becomes the primary database. We have talked about that. So that's your primary database and everybody else is secondary. The way now this is replicating is the primary database asynchronously. So it does not happen immediately. okay, for the committed transactions to each secondary databases. So if you actually have a record that gets written in your primary, it might take a few seconds, it might take a couple of minutes for it to write to the secondary databases. Because you might, if you have multiple databases, it will take some time to go to all of them. Okay, that's what we are calling this asynchronously replicates. I'll talk to you about how to take care of that as well. Only full transactions are replicated. Okay, so what happens is that once the transaction completes in your primary, only at that point it's replicated, and it kind of makes sense with that. While at any given point, the secondary database might be a slightly behind the primary, like I mentioned, that the transaction might not replicate immediately. The secondary data is guaranteed to never have partial transactions. So your data integrity will always be maintained. So your transaction is committed to your primary. Once that's committed, that's when it replicates, and the replication will make sure it's committed on the other one as well. There's no partial transactions. And like I mentioned, the secondary database is fully readable. Like all your secondary databases will be fully readable. So you can actually use these copies for other things. Like I mentioned, most commonly, it will be for replicating. I want to actually come back over here. I said over here that, it's asynchronously replicates. So I've looked into this quite a bit, and it's there in SQL's, in Azure SQL's documentation as well. Let's say that you cannot do that. You have to have a synchronous replication. Some of you from always on background might also say that, yeah, in always on we have asynchronous, but we can also do synchronous as well. Well, in Azure SQL, you can do synchronous as well. You have to ask your developer while writing this application to actually run a query, pass a command to the SQL server. What that will do is that will ensure that when this transaction is being committed on the primary, it replicates on it also is committed on your secondary, and only when that is done, the transaction will be known to be completed. Okay, so it will actually do this synchronously, but it's something that your developer needs to do while writing to the database. I think it's a stored procedure that needs to be run every time you are, running a query and you are inserting any data or writing any data to your databases. There are obvious pitfalls with that, and that's no different from the things that we have in always on premises as well, is that now, depending on the latency between the data centers between your primary and secondary, obviously the secondary commit might take a little bit of time. Since your application is going to wait for the secondary commits to happen for maybe say one to all four of them, your transaction might become a little slower, right? So if you have a lot of writing that is happening to your databases, it's recommended that you don't do that, because now you're waiting. So let's say the worst case scenario, you're waiting for your all four secondary databases to be committed at the same time and then come back and report your application. That's actually probably not a good idea, depending on all the latencies, because this all replication is happening through regular internet. Well, I wouldn't say regular internet. Microsoft has definitely their circuits between data centers, but it's happening over the internet. So you have to be mindful of that. Okay. So I'm not going to go through the demonstration of that, but what I'm going to do is now go through the demonstration of active geo replication and show you how easy it is to implement. Okay. So we are back to our portal over here. I want to get rid of this extra backups that we had over here, database that we had over here. The reason I'm doing that is because I'm just trying to keep this a little bit cleaner. Let's say we already found out what we needed from these databases, and now they're gone. Okay, so this is our primary database. So let's go to our, it's not yet a primary database, but this is our database. We go over here. You'll see there is an option over here called Geo Replication. It does not say active Geo Replication, but it is the active Geo Replication. So let's go over there. Now, I built this database server in East US 2. So as you can see, East US 2, it's telling me it's Ranger SQL Server. That's my server name. That's my database, and it's saying it's online. If I scroll down over here, there's no secondaries. Geo Replication is not configured. I know that. This is something you have to opt in. This is not done automatically for you. Okay, so it's giving me an option, Central US. Can you tell me why it says it's recommended over here? The reason it says it's recommended over here, because East US 2, if you recall, the paired region or location was Central US. Based on where you are, your paired location might be recommended somewhere else. Do you have to do it in your recommended one paired one? Microsoft probably might want you to, because I mean, or recommend you to, because there might be between paired regions, there might be better bandwidth, better, better internet connectivity between those two, because Microsoft knows we'll be doing this often for many other things, right? But over here, you can actually choose anything else. Like I could be saying that, hey, I want to have this in West US. I don't want to even have it in the Central US location. Um, Somewhere else, right? So you can have to have up to 4 of this, but I'm going to just go ahead and do one in Central US. As soon as I clicked over here, you can see over here, it's saying Central US region, the database name, it kept the same database name over there. Pricing tier, you can always have the same pricing tier, which is, I mean, standard 0 is the lowest tier, but I'm saying that, okay, let's do that. You can change it. So you can say my secondary database requires more power. It is usually, now let's say that I had S3 and I'm going to a secondary. Usually recommendation is don't go lower than your current tier, because now your performance might be great and it's trying to write really, really fast depending on all the DTUs it has. It might be a bottleneck if your secondary tier is actually something lower. Let's say I had S3 and I'm going with my secondary as S0. You're obviously going to see performance bottlenecks. In fact, uh, since it's going to commit every time a transaction is done, it might if not be possible because you have that many transactions. Your lower tier might not even have that kind of DTUs. For me, it's not a big deal. I'm in S0. I'll keep it S0 as well. The secondary type. So now I mentioned something that the secondary type is always going to be readable. You do have an option right now to have the secondary as non-readable as well. That, hey, I'm going to have a secondary database. I don't want to have this, any readability because of whatever reason. I omitted this part intentionally because Microsoft has taken this option out. Um, Literally in few months this option of non-readability will not be there. It will always be readable secondary copies. Okay, it actually says over here in April 2017 non-readable type will be retired. Okay, it's always going to be readable secondary. So this comes back to the old, we had the georeplication versus the active georeplication. So active georeplication is all about readability. Now, the target server. I mentioned that your secondary database will need a server of its own. This is where, the cost comes in. You cannot have just, do it on the same server at all. This is a different location. There's going to be a different server that is going to be hosting it, and it's just like SQL Always On. So I'm going to call this server as Ranger SQL Serve REPL, saying that this is going to be something like a replication. As you can see, it's creating a brand new server. It actually wants me to put in my username, passwords, and everything like that. It can definitely have, you know, different username and password, but I would suggest you keep all the logins in the different server the same. And I'll tell you what I mean about by it in a minute. So password, you can see it's going to Central US because we have done this, similar to creating a server, the firewall rules and everything that comes over here. Alrighty, so we have done this. Now let's create. Okay, so basically, now I'm going to pause and come back and show you what happened after we clicked OK over there. Okay, we are going to wait for the server to actually be created and this database to be created and the replication to be started. In fact, if you come over here, you can now see my East and Central now has this little funky thing going on over here because it's showing me that there is a geo replication that's going to happen or it's in progress or things like that. Okay, so let me come back once that's completed. It'll be a couple of minutes. Alrighty, it has completed. As you can see, there's a blue line over here, and that little check mark means it actually shows the replication is happening right now. So let's go back and see what actually happened. So I'm going to go over here to SQL servers. In SQL servers right now, you'll actually see a new SQL server over here, Ranger SQL Server REPL. Okay, so this is a new SQL server. Uh, Definitely has a new connection string, and I'll show you what that means. If I go to properties over here, you'll see that it actually has the same database name, which is great. If you go to properties, you can see it actually has a new string to connect to. So I'm going to copy that real quick. If you come to databases over here, you'll actually see, refresh this, you'll see that there's two databases with the same name. But notice over here, replication role, something new showed up here. It's primary because this is in East US 2, and in secondary when it's in Central US over here. Okay, so let's go do something interesting here. This one is connected to Ranger SQL Server. Let me refresh this one here. Ranger SQL Server over here. This is my database over here as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a new SQL Management Server Studio, and I'm going to connect to the replicated or the secondary database over there. Okay, so give me a moment here. This is going to be really cool, guys, and this demonstration is really awesome. So let me change that. This is the new replicated server. You could have named this anything, by the way. Okay, so what I'm going to do is this is the username I created. It's the same username and password. Let me log in. Actually, it's going to tell me I cannot log in because of the firewall. If you remember my previous sessions over here, when a new server is created, by default, it does not allow anything, right? So let's go over here to firewall. It should show my IP address over here. Beautiful. So what I'm doing is I'm allowing my IP address, my, the demonstration computer IP address. I need to add that in for firewall purposes. So even if it creates a new server, secondary server, it is just like a regular server, and actually it is a regular server, and it actually makes sure that firewall and all those things are still required. So let's go ahead and connect that. And you may or may not need to do this, right? I mean, you might say that, hey, I don't need to access it, so I don't need to go put it in a firewall. Let my data be there. If ever I need to fail over, I'll do whatever I need to do. Okay, so you need to do that over here. And now you can see where we are in Ranger SQL Server REPL or replication. Same name, database's name, right? So both this database, Ranger SQL Server and Ranger SQL Server replication, they have the same database. I'm going to show you something really cool. So go to tables over here. In here, there's a customer table. So let me go and do an edit top 200 rows. So I'll show you something over here. Takes a couple of seconds to actually run this query and show it over here. Okay, so this is actually a customer table where there's a customer ID. This is the sample database that Adventure works, right? You can see that first name, last name, key, whatever. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go and do the same over here on the replicated database. And I'm going to not edit, but I'm going to go and view the top 1000, so which is select top 1000 rows. So it should show me Mr. Orlando there as well. It's the same table. Okay, it's running the query right now. Obviously, Orlando key shows up over here. Great. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to go to my primary, so Ranger SQL Server. This is my primary database over here. It's an edit mode, so I'm going to just click over there. Instead of Mr. Orlando, I'll have Mr. Sean. Press enter. So that is actually committed. That's how you edit the database from the management studio directly. So that record has been changed. So if that record changed, this is the replicated server. If I run this query once again from execute over here, that should change. Okay, this Orlando should change. Look at that. That actually changed. So I don't have enough transactions that are happening at the same time. It might not be in production in your environment as fast to replicate to this other location. But over here, it happened almost instantly. When I changed anything over here, when I changed anything on my primary database, it actually changed to my secondary almost instantly. Isn't that amazing? Now, I'm going to show you something that you're not allowed to do. So I'm in my replicated database over here. When I went to my primary and went to my customer and did an edit, it allowed me. Let me try doing that in my replicated database over here. See what it says. It's doing something. Wait for it. Alrighty. Now, I'm going to move this back to Orlando. Okay? So it brought up the edit panel. I'm on the replicated server. Orlando, press enter over here and see what happens. Wow. It actually says no row was updated because the database is read only. Okay, so this was the replication or the replicated server. The secondary server is only read only. So you cannot edit anything over there. only the primary database, which is the SQL Server, you can do all your transactions on. But this is great. I mean, you have a copy of your database over here. You can do reporting on this. You can have something else that really pounds this database server for any other purposes. All it can do is read only transactions now. It cannot do anything editing. And that is really cool. Okay, so a couple of things I want to talk to you about. In the primary server, so back to the primary server, you see all the security and the logins. These are actually server level, right? So if you had multiple logins in your primary, in the secondary, you have to go make sure that those logins are there. Your server is created from scratch. That is not replicated for you. This is a database level replication. So anything you have in your database over here, that gets replicated. Nothing on the server gets replicated. This includes your IP addresses, like your firewall. Like on my primary, the firewall was obviously working to allow me, but the secondary, when I tried to connect, the firewall was not there. So treat the other SQL server that got created or you created as part of this replication as a brand new server and copy over those settings, which I mean, you might have partial or transact SQL to do that, or you may do this manually to make sure that both are equal. So in case of a failure right now, let's say that your application is going to go through some sort of a maintenance right now, whatever, all you have to do is to change the connection string, because this is almost live, right? So all you do is change the connection string of to this server and you're good to go. Given how this can be done with aliases on your Windows servers, you can actually have your Windows alias changed to this one over here. So the way this is now designed, obviously, or the way we have done this right now, is that this is the secondary, right? So let's say now you had a DR scenario, or you need high availability, you need our application to connect to the secondary database for doing all its work. We know the secondary is not writable, it's only readable. So how do you actually fail over to that? So let's go and look at that right now. This is the secondary one. Click on this one and you go to Geo Replication. So we are clicking the secondary database, okay? Go to the Geo Replication. Just looking for that option. Give me a moment here. Come on, scroll down. Okay, so you can see the primary is online, obviously, and this is the secondaries. It now says Central US Readable. Let's go click on that. And you actually have an option over here to fail over and stop replication. So one, you can completely stop the replication for whatever reason, but what we are interested is in the failover. So we are actually connected to the secondary, okay? So over here, this was the secondary database. You only have that option, the secondary database. So we want to now fail over to the central US. So go ahead and click on that. It actually tells you that it will make the replication server the primary one, and the old primary will become the new secondary if it's online. Do you wish to proceed? Yes, and we will let that do right now. So it has been submitted over here. You can see it's pending. It's doing some stuff right now for the replication to reconverge, and we'll give it a couple of minutes over here. So let's go. This one still shows as secondary. I keep refreshing. At a given point, check this out, it just changed to primary. So at this point, both of them are primary. Actually, you know what? I'm going to pause the video a little bit rather than making it go crazy. All right, that took a while for this to become secondary. I think I waited, what, 10 minutes or so? So look at this right now. This used to be my secondary location with REPL. It's primary right now, and my original one is now secondary, okay? So if I go over here, and now I look at this, replication, geo replication. Let me see what happened here. Should show, okay, should show the other way around. You can see the central US is now online, and my this one is the readable one. So if I go to my replicated one over here, yeah, let's actually close this. Let's actually close this as well. So let's go ahead, go to my replicated database right now. I know this session is taking a little bit more than an hour, but I just want to show you everything over here. This is going to be the replicated one. I'm going to go ahead and put in my credentials. Okay, so I'm in my replicated database over here. I should be able to see my tables. And in my tables, if I go to the customers and do an edit this time, come on. Yep, it showed up over here. So if I change it to Sean, let's say, press enter, as you can see, it had taken that change. Before we were not able to do that on the secondary database, but now we can, because the secondary database now is primary. So obviously your application now will have to point to this database, right? It's not going to point to, I mean, by default, it's not going to change all of that for your application. You have to do that yourself. So that's your intervention that's required. So I think it's a pretty cool technology. This is the most robust DR and HA in the cloud right now with Azure SQL. Okay, so that concludes pretty much our session. So what we have gone over today is we have gone over what business continuity is, understand what RPO actually means, what retention actually means, and how those objectives are what that decides that what kind of backup solution or technology or amount of money you should throw at making sure your business runs. Okay. At the same time, then we went through and did the very first export backup, export database backup strategy, which we said was not the preferred method, but it's almost like a full backup, and there are scenarios where you might use that. Then we talked about the automated backups, which is by default, that's turned on your databases. It gives you a point in time restoring capability, which is great. Most of the things are already done there for you. There's very less reason for you to not go through that weekly, hourly, and 5 minutes incremental backups. So for most people, that will work out. And then we had talked about the optional active georeplication. We talked about what is a georeplication versus what's an active georeplication, how you can have 4 other replicated databases, and we have gone through the demonstration on how to do it, how to go through the, how to go through and query and read the secondary database. And finally, what we did is we failed over to the secondary location, and I showed you how that took over and became the primary. So this is a jam-packed session. There's a lot to think about, lot to look at. Not a whole lot of this will be. There's quite a bit of this on the exams, but you know, um, a lot of things over here are more about you going and doing this in production environment rather than just passing your exam. Okay, so so that's that. I think that concludes our this session. Before we conclude, I want to talk to you about one thing. A lot of people actually do send me emails, and I've not replied to those, but I'll be doing that today. Is do I have any practice questions? No, I do not. They asked me, do I know what the questions are on the exams? No, I do not. In fact, if I did, and if I shared that with you, I'll be breaking NDA, and there could be, not only they'll throw me out of the program, uh, there might be even penalties, imprisonment, a lot of other things that can happen with Microsoft. So no, those things I do not. Your best method to study is definitely still going through the certifications website, looking at the curriculum, and mapping that with whatever you are learning from all resources. And finally, this is a question I get asked everywhere, is that are my video sessions like enough to pass the exam? I wish I could say that, but the answer is no, because to pass the exam, there's a lot more reading that you definitely have to do. My videos are actually, from what I understand and what I've been told, are quite comprehensive. There are things that I have touched in my videos that are way beyond what you'll be having on your exam. So it does help because it does start encompassing a lot of things. But at the same time, it's not exhaustive. Exhaustive means that I do not go and talk about every single option. I talk about capabilities. I don't go and do like every single option, what are the different options available, and this is just an example, right, of a certain feature. And Microsoft exams, they're very sneaky when it comes to that. I mean, all of a sudden they will have a question, so these are the options that are available to you, which one do you think is correct? Well, if you haven't done your studies, haven't read documents, haven't done this thing properly, there is no way you'll remember that, right? One thing I can talk to you about your exam though. In your exam, you're not going to be asked about something that can change a lot. What do I exactly mean by that? Let's say we were talking about the SQL databases here. We know there is, different tiers: S0, S1, S2, premium storage. I mean, the premium SQL. They will not test you on those kind of things. Like they will not come and say, tell us what are the different tiers that are there, or what are the different virtual machine tiers that are there today, like A7, A8, or D series and all that. Microsoft is not going to ask you very what they call SKU specific questions. So those questions you don't have to worry about. But everything else you do. The best option to do this, either read a book or go through Azure documentation, which I must warn you is quite exhaustive and way beyond what you need for the exams. So try to keep a balance between the curriculum and what you read and what you view, what you watch. There's a lot of YouTube videos I have. Go through all of them. But definitely remember the exam changes, the curriculum changes, the questions change. So you have to be careful what you do over there, okay? But my videos by itself will give you a lot of knowledge to write your exam, but not everything. I hope this answers some of your questions, all right? Definitely more, our 10 minutes into the session right now, so I would like to conclude here. Guys, that's my training site, okay? The YouTube channel you're probably on. The slides. The slides are on slideshare.net. I've been falling a little behind, but it's all caught up right now. And this slide is going to be there very soon as well. Twitter handle at Sean Ismail. Email me. I'm not very great at responding, so leave a message on Twitter maybe, or leave a message on comment on YouTube. And if you want to connect to me on LinkedIn, that's my LinkedIn location over there. Uh, do like the videos, guys. I like it when you like the videos. It's good to go and see in there that it's helping people. So people are excited about it as much as I'm excited in creating this, right? It definitely works as an encouragement. So thank you for viewing, guys. Please like the videos on YouTube, and I will see you in the next session.